The lawyer's office was colder than I remembered, or maybe it was just the chill of death that still clung to the air. Mr. Harrington sat behind his massive oak desk, his expression unreadable, his fingers steepled in front of him like a fortress. I smoothed my black dress, the expensive silk feeling like a betrayal against my skin. My grandfather had hated silk, called it pretentious, yet here I was, wearing it to hear the reading of his will. "Isabella," Mr. Harrington began, his voice echoing in the spacious office, "your grandfather left you everything. The company, the estate, the investments, all of it, the air left my lungs, everything, but that was impossible. My grandfather had always been clear the business would go to my cousin, Michael, the golden child, the heir apparent. The one who had actually worked in the company while I pursued my art career, much to my family's disappointment. My husband, Daniel, squeezed my hand under the table. I could feel the tension in his grip, the barely contained excitement. Everything?" He repeated, his voice a little too eager. Mr. Harrington's eyes flickered to Daniel, then back to me. "There are conditions, of course. You must take over as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises immediately. You must maintain control of the company for at least 5 years. And you must live in the family estate." I stared at him, my mind reeling. CEO, me. I didn't know the first thing about running a billion-dollar corporation. I painted watercolors and ran a small gallery. I knew more about brushstrokes than business strategies. "But why?" I managed to whisper. "Why not, Michael?" Mr. Harrington slid a large manila envelope across the desk. "Your grandfather left you this. He said you'd understand when you read it." The envelope felt heavy in my hands, weighted with secrets. Daniel tried to take it from me, but I held it close. Something in Mr. Harrington's expression told me this was meant for my eyes only. Later that evening, in the study of the estate I just inherited, I opened the envelope. Inside was a simple leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed with age, and a single sheet of paper with my grandfather's familiar handwriting. "My dearest Isabella, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you've inherited what should have been yours all along. I know you must have questions why I left you everything, why I was so hard on you, why I never seemed to appreciate your art. The answers are complicated, but they begin with the truth about our family business. Blackwood Enterprises wasn't built on honest means. My father made his fortune through exploitation, corruption, and worse. The money is tainted, Isabella, and it has brought nothing but misery to our family. I tried to break the cycle. I wanted to give the company to someone who would do things differently. Someone with integrity, someone like you. But there are people who would do anything to maintain control, including your cousin Michael, and I suspect your husband Daniel. Be careful, my darling, trust no one. The diary will explain everything. I'm sorry for all the years we lost. I watched you grow into an extraordinary woman from afar, and I've never been more proud of anyone. With all my love, grandfather." Tears blurred my vision as I read the letter again. All those years I thought he disapproved of me, of my choices, of my life. He'd been protecting me, he'd been setting the stage for this moment. I opened the diary to the first page, dated 60 years earlier. My great-grandfather's handwriting was elegant but firm, each stroke confident and sure. December 3, 1963. The strike at the factory continues. The workers are demanding better conditions, fair wages. Thomas says we cannot afford to meet their demands. I told him we have no choice, we'll bring in new workers. If the old ones protest... Well, there are ways to handle such things. I read on, my horror growing with each page. The ways to handle such things included violence, intimidation, blackmail. My great-grandfather had built his empire on the backs of broken men and their families, and he'd done it without a shred of remorse. But it was the entries from my grandfather's time that truly shattered me. He had tried to change things, to make amends, to turn Blackwood Enterprises into a force for good. And he'd been systematically undermined at every turn by his own brother, by the board of directors, by people who preferred profit over principles. Grandfather, the final entries were the most chilling. My grandfather had discovered that Michael was embezzling from the company, funneling money to offshore accounts. And he suspected that Daniel had married me not for love, but for access to the Blackwood fortune. I cannot prove it yet, he wrote in his last entry, dated just 2 weeks before his death. But I know in my bones that Daniel is working with Michael. They're planning to take control of the company, and they're using my Isabella to do it. I have to stop them, I have to protect her. The diary fell from my trembling hands. Daniel, my husband of 3 years, the man I'd built a life with, the man I'd trusted with my deepest secrets, my greatest fears, my most vulnerable moments. Was it all a lie? Had our entire marriage been a calculated move in some twisted game for power and money? I thought back to our whirlwind romance. Daniel had pursued me with an intensity that had been both flattering and overwhelming. He'd seemed to understand me in ways no one else ever had. He'd supported my art, encouraged my dreams, made me feel seen and valued. But he'd also been curiously interested in my family, in the business, in my relationship with my grandfather. He'd asked questions that, at the time, had seemed like normal curiosity. Now they felt like reconnaissance. I heard his footsteps approaching the study. Quickly, I shoved the diary and letter back into the envelope and hid it behind a loose panel in the wall, a hiding spot my grandfather had shown me when I was a child. Isabella? Daniel called out, his voice smooth and concerned. Are you all right? You've been in here for hours. I forced a smile as he entered the room. Just overwhelmed, I think. This is all so much. He came to me, wrapping his arms around me, his touch once so comforting now feeling like a cage. I know, my love. But we'll get through it together. I'll help you. I'll take care of everything. Take care of everything. The words sent a chill down my spine. Is that what he'd been doing all along? Taking care of everything? Manipulating everything? I was thinking, I said, keeping my voice light. Maybe I should take some business classes before I jump into being CEO. I don't know the first thing about running a company. His arms tightened around me. Nonsense. You're a Blackwood. It's in your blood. And I'll be right here beside you, every step of the way, right here beside me, controlling me, directing me, using me. I suppose you're right, I said, leaning into him, playing the part of the overwhelmed heiress. I'm so lucky to have you. He kissed the top of my head. I'm the lucky one. As he held me, I made a decision. I would play their game. I would be the naive, overwhelmed heiress they thought I was. I would let Daniel help. The first board meeting as CEO was exactly as terrifying as I'd anticipated. 12 pairs of eyes watched me as I took my place at the head of the massive conference table, my grandfather's place. Michael sat to my right, his expression a carefully constructed mask of supportive cousinliness that didn't quite reach his eyes. Daniel sat to my left, the proud husband, though I could feel the tension in his posture, the barely contained urge to take control. Welcome, everyone, I began, my voice steadier than I felt. I know this is unconventional. I'm not my grandfather. I don't have his experience or his business acumen. But I have his blood, and I have his trust. And I intend to honor that trust by learning everything I can about this company and leading it to continued success. There were polite nods around the table, but the skepticism was palpable. They saw Painter playing CEO, a woman who knew more about color theory than corporate theory. They saw a figurehead, a puppet, and that was exactly what I wanted them to see. I'll be relying heavily on my existing leadership team during this transition, I continued, smiling warmly at Michael. Michael has been instrumental in the company's recent successes, and I have every confidence he'll continue to be. Michael's mask slipped for just a second, surprise flickering in his eyes before the smooth professionalism returned. Thank you, Isabella. I'm here to support you in any way I can. The meeting continued, a blur of financial reports and strategic plans that might as well have been in another language. But I nodded in all the right places, asked carefully crafted questions that made me sound engaged but naive, and deferred to the experts on every major decision. Afterward, Daniel escorted me back to my new office, my grandfather's office. The room was exactly as he'd left it, all dark wood and leather, the walls lined with books he'd actually read, the desk scattered with papers he'd actually written. It still smelled like him, like old books and expensive whiskey and integrity. "You did wonderfully," Daniel said, closing the door behind us. "They respect you, they pity me," I corrected, sinking into the large leather chair behind the desk. "They think I'm in over my head." He came around the desk, leaning down to kiss me. "Let them think that. It gives us the advantage. Us." The word felt like a key turning in a lock. US against them, except I was starting to wonder if them included me. "I was thinking," I said, swiveling the chair to look out the massive window overlooking the city, "maybe I should bring in my own team. Some fresh perspectives." Daniel's smile tightened. "I'm not sure that's necessary. The current team has decades of experience." "We don't want to rock the boat, of course," I said easily. "You're right. I'm just nervous." He came up behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. "You don't need to be nervous. You have me. I'll handle everything. Handle everything." The phrase was becoming a mantra, a threat. Over the next few weeks, I played my part perfectly. I attended meetings, signed documents, smiled for the cameras. I was the perfect puppet CEO, visible enough to satisfy the terms of the will, but passive enough to let the real players maintain control. But while Daniel and Michael thought I was spending my afternoons at the art gallery or having long lunches with friends, I was actually in the corporate archives, digging through decades of company records. I hired a private tutor to teach me business and finance. I reached out to my grandfather's old allies, the ones who had been pushed out when Michael took over. And every night after Daniel thought I was asleep, I read my grandfather's diary, each entry revealing another layer of the corruption that ran through Blackwood Enterprises like poison. January 15, 1998. The environmental report came back today. "The contamination is worse than we thought. Thomas wants to bury it, says the cleanup would cost millions. I say we have a moral responsibility." We argued for hours. In the end, the report disappeared. I'm becoming the man I swore I wouldn't be. March 3, 2005, Michael came to me today with concerns about the new factory in Indonesia. "The working conditions are appalling, but the profits are incredible." When I suggested we make changes, he laughed. "That's not how business works, grandfather." When did I lose him? When did the money become more important than the people? November 12, 2018, I've found evidence of embezzlement. Large sums, cleverly hidden. The charity gala was the social event of the season, and everyone who was anyone would be there. Including, I knew, the investors Michael and Daniel were trying to woo for their latest scheme, a hostile takeover of a smaller competitor that would undoubtedly involve the same kind of unethical practices my grandfather had documented. I dressed carefully that evening, choosing a gown of deep crimson that made me feel powerful, dangerous. I styled my hair in an elegant updo that showed off the Blackwood family diamonds, the same diamonds my great-grandmother had worn when she'd secretly funded the workers' strikes against her own husband's company. "You look stunning," Daniel said when he saw me, his eyes appreciative but distant. He was already thinking about the deal, about the investors, about the money. "Thank you," I said, smiling warmly. "I want to make a good impression tonight. It's important for the company." He kissed my forehead. "You'll be perfect. Just remember to let me do the talking when it comes to business." "Of course," I said sweetly. "You're the expert." The gala was held at the museum, where my gallery was currently featuring an exhibition of local artists. I'd insisted on the venue, claiming sentimental reasons. The truth was, I needed home field advantage. As we moved through the crowd, I played my part perfectly. The gracious heiress, the supportive wife, the CEO who knew her place. I smiled and laughed and made small talk, all while watching Daniel and Michael work the room like the predators they were. I saw the moment they found their targets, the investors from Singapore who were known for their flexible ethics. I watched as Daniel turned on the charm, that same charm he'd used on me when we first met. I saw Michael hovering nearby, ready to swoop in with numbers and projections. This was my chance. I excused myself to freshen up, but instead of heading to the restroom, I slipped into the back office of the museum where Rachel was waiting for me. My old friend, my only ally, the person who had believed me when I told her the truth about Daniel and Michael. Are you ready? She asked, her expression grim. I nodded, my heart pounding. It's time. While Daniel and Michael thought they were closing the deal of a lifetime, I was about to show them what happened when you underestimated a Blackwood woman. The plan was simple but devastating. Using the evidence I'd gathered from my grandfather's safe and diary, Rachel and I had prepared a supplemental presentation for the investors, one that showed the true cost of doing business with Blackwood Enterprises: the environmental destruction, the worker exploitation, the corruption, the crimes. But we weren't just targeting the Singapore investors. We'd invited reporters, real journalists, not the bought and paid for media mouthpieces Michael usually used. And we'd reached out to the authorities with the evidence of embezzlement and fraud. The trap was set. All that was left was to spring it. I returned to the gala just as Daniel and Michael were leading the investors toward a private room for their presentation. I slipped in behind them, smiling innocently when Daniel noticed me. I thought I might sit in, I said, learn from the masters. Daniel's smile was tight. Of course, my love, though this might be a bit technical for you. I'm sure I'll manage, I said, taking a seat at the back of the room. The presentation began. Michael started with the numbers, the projected profits, the market share, the growth potential. Then Daniel took over, talking about vision and strategy and legacy. They were good, I had to give them that. They made corruption sound like innovation, exploitation sound like efficiency. Then, just as they were moving in for the kill, the door opened and Rachel walked in, followed by the museum staff with additional projection equipment. What's this? Michael asked, his smile faltering. A supplemental presentation, I said, standing up. I thought our investors should have all the information before making a decision. Before Daniel or Michael could stop me, I took the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, while my husband and cousin have shown you the pretty picture, I'd like to show you what's behind the frame. I nodded to Rachel, who started the projection. The first image was the environmental report my grandfather had written about the contamination, the one that had disappeared, then photos of the factory conditions in Indonesia, then documents showing the embezzlement, then the photos of Daniel and Michael meeting years before they'd supposedly met. The room erupted in chaos. The investors stood up, their expressions shifting from interest to horror. The reporters I'd invited started taking photos, asking questions. And through it all, Daniel and Michael stared at me, their masks finally completely gone. You stupid bitch, Michael snarled, advancing toward me. What have you done? But security, real security, not the corporate security Michael controlled, entered the room. And behind them, federal agents. It's over, I said, my voice clear and steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. The game is over. As the agents led Daniel and Michael away in handcuffs, Daniel turned to me, his eyes filled with a hatred so pure it took my breath away. I loved you, he spat. I actually loved you. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the man I'd married, the man I'd loved. The man who had held me when I cried, who had supported my dreams, who had made me feel safe. Then I saw the evidence spread across the projection screens. The lies, the manipulation, the betrayal. You have a funny way of showing love, I said, my voice cold. And as they led him away, I turned to face the room, the investors, the reporters, the remains of my old life. My name is Isabella Blackwood, I said, my voice strong and clear. And as of today, Blackwood Enterprises is going to become the company my grandfather always wanted it to be. A company built on integrity, not exploitation, on principles, not profits. The past ends now, the future begins today. And as I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of their lies, I realized that I wasn't just inheriting a company. I was inheriting a legacy, a chance to make things right. An opportunity to build something my grandfather would have been proud of. The puppet had cut her strings, and the show was just beginning.